So in the first part of this session, we're going to be focusing on why D&I. It's important that we truly understand what we mean by it, and it means facing into some uncomfortable truths. So there's been a global awakening about D&I and social injustice. We're talking about equality, we're talking about gender, we're talking about sexuality. We're talking about this because of movements such as Me Too, Black Lives Matter, the gender pay gap reporting, lack of board representation, Brexit, socioeconomic backgrounds, cultural appropriation, the positioning from political leaders, the impact of the pandemic on minority groups. There are so many things being discussed that talk about difference and bring difference to the front and centre. It's no longer taboo, we can't ignore it, and it's leading to uncomfortable conversations that are really quite sensitive, and conversations that we might sort of inherently want to stay clear of. There's a really strong business case for diversity and inclusion. It impacts the bottom line. So where we see greater board representation, we see companies having higher financial performance. We see changes in organizational culture, the way people work together, the way they collaborate. We see improvements in those where we have greater diversity and inclusion. Something that's really important to D&I is around employer representation. We see more and more job seekers placing importance on having greater representation in those organizations. It's part of their recruitment decision. So if we want to make sure we get the right people in our organizations and the best people, we need to think about the impact having a diverse and inclusive organization has on those. When it comes to innovation, having more people with difference in our organizations can open up new opportunities. So, for example, the UK minorities have a spending power of £300 billion. If we have more people from diverse backgrounds working in our organizations on products and services, we're likely to have greater access to those. And we know that having diverse and inclusive organizations resulting in increasing engagement. And when you increase employee engagement, you increase organizational performance. There's lots of evidence out there which creates a very strong business case for diverse and inclusive organizations. So in terms of how we move forward, we really need to think about the ultimate objective of creating attitudinal and behavioural change at the ground level. We know the issues, we've identified the problem, so what do we do? Well, we need to think about, how we can make the change. And we know that a policy-driven box-ticking exercise isn't going to cut it. It doesn't work because that's what we've been doing for the last decade. So if we want to make a real change, we need to follow a process. We need to have policies that have D&I principles embedded within them. I hate to use the term, but it's a way of policing the expected behaviours of employees. It's a way of demonstrating governance and holding everyone to account. And this stems from the board members right the way through to employees on the ground. We need to stand up and role model by having leaders that actively demonstrate these right behaviours. According to the Harvard Business Review, when they talk about colour, they said, open quote, "Without leaders demonstrating a growth and learning mindset right now, it will be hard to build employee trust with corporate statements alone." So it's not just about having policies and processes. We need leaders to stand up and stand by them. When it comes to processes, it's one thing to tackle behavioural change, but we need to identify some of the stumbling blocks within our processes that can stifle our ambitions. So, we're talking about things like onboarding processes where we might have bias, conscious or unconscious. We're talking about routes to development, progression, promotion, things like recognition, and they need to be assessed to make sure they're not exclusionary. We need to make sure we've got alignment. So, it's one thing to have policies, it's another thing to have people stand up and the process in the right place. But we also need to create awareness across the organisation so people are aligned with what we're trying to achieve. And then finally, and ultimately, the main objective is to create behavioural change on the ground. And this is where education is needed so that all employees are bought into the process and that policies and practices are lived. It's about being explicit about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And we need to make clear the repercussions of failing to demonstrate these desired behaviours and attitudes. Over the long term, these will become habitual. But right now, in order to make change, we need to make sure that they are actively encouraged and promoted, and that there are repercussions for not demonstrating these things or actively demonstrating the wrong behaviours. So a good strategy is grounded in evidence. In our 2021 EX Trends report, which you may or may not have seen, and you can download that from our website, we talk about developing a longer term research strategy. It might take less time, it might take more time depending on your resources, but a good place to start is by establishing a diversity and inclusion vision and mission for your organization. It's about creating a strategy to design your strategy. You can't simply sit down with a blank piece of paper and a pen and write something up. You need to have the evidence and the information and insights to be able to draw that up. So the first thing is gathering that information and evidence. And something key to that, and it's a mindset shift, is not trying to do everything at once and expecting that change is going to happen over time. If we try and do something overnight, we're just putting a sticking plaster on a broken foot, and it's not going to help the situation at all. So we need to take a comprehensive review of our data and information gathering. It might seem like a lot to do, but it's the right way to go about getting it right. And I think these steps clearly echo the processes that Clarion Events have followed to getting something that's going to work for them. It's about using data that we already have. So, for example, looking at your HRIS data to see the makeup of your organization, getting to grips with the facts and figures of who exists within our organization, where do they come from, and who do we need our D&I strategy to work for. It's about identifying where in our policies and processes is D&I, a focus on D&I needed. It's about getting buy-in. Cheryl mentioned time and time again the importance of leadership buy-in into the process. So it's defining what D&I means to your organization and getting leaders to stand by that. Using previous survey data. It goes without saying that most organizations will have asked one or two questions over the last 3 or 4 years that relates to diversity inclusion in some shape or form. So look at the existing data you've got to understand and get an indicative baseline of what opinions might be. It's about having a two-way conversation involving employees in the process. So conducting focus groups and listening hard, not just listening to the diverse groups as well, but also listening to the non-diverse groups, because you need to gather perspectives from every angle. And then a key part of getting the information you need is conducting an employee survey to understand the real issue. So using all the information you've gathered, design and deploy a survey that's going to give you the information to develop the right strategy. There's lots of information here, but I'm just going to go with some key trends. So, use that evidence that you've gathered across all of those processes and look for significant differences between groups. Look at drivers of your diversity and inclusion key performance indicators and engagement, for example. It's important to empathetically understand what employees are saying when we look at verbatim free text comments in surveys. Don't just see this as someone complaining, look collectively at responses from different groups and try to put yourself in their position. It's about, speaking to people and using employees to contribute to the process. So involve people, again, from both sides of the coin, from diverse and non-diverse groups. Work with them to focus on how we close the gap. So if opinions are low in a particular employee experience, try to identify, well, what's going to close the gap and get us to 100%, for example. And be creative, use techniques that create involvement and action. A key to all of this is creating and getting buy-in to your evidence-based strategy with leadership, creating accountability amongst senior stakeholders so that you've got that top-level sponsorship, and being realistic about what we can achieve in the time that we've got. Not overcommitting, but also not using that to find excuses. When it comes to deploying the strategy, communication is absolutely paramount. It needs to come from the board. They need to stand by these messages. There needs to be awareness at all levels of the organization. And, we need to be really simple about the do's and the don'ts when it comes to employee behaviors on the grounds. Be really specific about what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. When it comes to deploying our strategies, they need to be smart. We need to think about doing one or two things or a few things that we can deliver in their entirety, rather than having a list of 20 things and failing to deliver on all of them. Let's commit and deliver something that, one or two things that we can do well. And everyone is involved. We're all here probably thinking, wow, I've got a really long to-do list, when actually we are the facilitators of the process. HR, organizational development specialists, we make this happen, but we're not responsible for doing everything. Everyone in the organization is responsible for change happening. And we need to continue to communicate throughout the whole process on how we're performing, deliver living stories about changes that are happening from, and the impact changes happening on diverse groups, and constant board level reinforcement. And we need to check in from time to time. So, resurvey at the appropriate time, whether it's 12 months, 18 months, or 2 years, revisit and evaluate performance, check in on progress by asking one or two questions at your regular listening activities and your regular annual survey, for example, and don't be afraid to, adjust course of action if necessary. A couple of top tips around survey design. Don't try and ask everything to everybody. Questions can be branched in surveys, so you can ask one question to a particular group of people if you've already captured, their demographic information. Create a key performance indicator for diversity and inclusion in your organization, and look at the drivers of that in the same way that we look at employee engagement drivers. Ask open questions to employees who perhaps give negative responses. So if employees feel that they can't progress in the organization or that promotion is unfair, ask them to explain in detail why that is and what needs to change. And then use your demographic data as a key fundamental part of your analysis. So if we're looking at generic questions in an employee survey, these are questions that are asked to everybody, but what we want to look at is the demographic split. And in this example, and it's just demo data, we can very quickly identify that Black or Black British employees in this data have significantly lower opinions when it comes to being able to voice their opinion or feeling like they can be open at work. So we've got immediate insights on where we might need to focus our time, energy, and effort, and where it's going to make a difference. Involve the experts. We're here to help. We have made available some free diversity and inclusion questions, which you can download from our website and get in touch for the full bank of questions. We invite anyone who's joined us today to provide and share survey data with us, and we can create broader benchmarks specifically on diversity and inclusion. And don't forget to ask us how we can help. We do so much more than surveys, but we can certainly help you design the strategy. Just go to our resources pages on the website for more information.